Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 2nd of November 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. We will be joined by a live video Skype link by David Ellis from Strategic Defence Initiatives. We're going to be focusing today on some really fascinating events in UK involving the police and the military. We've got comment from MI5. And we're going to have a close look at what's been happening behind the scenes with the British military, seen, of course, against the background that, according to the British government, at least Russia is now the most dangerous world threat, and we're shortly going to be at war. Well, first of all, the good news is for those of us in Plymouth, the sun is still shining. There's a brilliantly blue sky. The leaves on the trees, what's left of them, are really spectacular. So we're happy. I'm not getting a lot of comment about the weather across UK, but I think most people are having a pretty sunny and good day today. What better place to start then than Mr. Keith Vaz? Now, we just picked up yesterday on the fact that, well, he was disgraced a few weeks ago because there'd been talk of drugs and rent boys. But no, this man is now been brought back into the fold. Orderorder.com had pushed out this tweet saying that here he is, that Keith Vaz had received support from MPs in order to get him sitting on the Justice Committee. So aside from drugs and rent boys, there was some interesting comments been made by informed members of the public who say, well, perhaps we should have a look into the background of Mr. Vaz when he was the legal officer on the management of an inner London council. But the story's been picked up by the Daily Mail, and here we are with the headline, "Why did Tory ministers help Vaz land the justice job?" And what does the Mail point out? That 10 cabinet members, never mind ordinary MPs, but some 10 cabinet members have actually voted to get Keith Vaz onto this very, very important Justice Committee. And let's remember this against the background of child abuse in this country and the fact that we still do not have a fully functioning child abuse inquiry, despite all the evidence that's come up of multiple children's homes across the country, accusations of child abuse against MPs, police silencing their own whistleblowers from within the Metropolitan Police. Despite all of this evidence, we still have no inquiry, but we're bringing a disgraced minister like Vaz into the Justice Committee. I wonder whether our viewers and listeners could help the Daily Mail, because the Daily Mail doesn't understand why they did it, to which we just say, well, child abuse is the engine of politics. And if you want to understand what really powers British politics in Westminster, then you have to understand that child abuse is the core of the machinery. This is the means by which people can be blackmailed. Don't believe me? Have a look at the video clip of the whip, the Tory whip, Tim Fortescue, speaking back in 1973, where he calmly says, yes, MPs came to us with little matters to do with small boys, but we covered it up because then they would do as we asked. So a Tory whip openly admitting on a BBC video shot, camera shot, that the Conservative Party was happy to cover up the abuse of children in order to be able to blackmail MPs to do the bidding of the secret inner society. So the Daily Mail, no reporters capable of understanding that, and the Daily Mail has said, please give us help to understand why Vaz should be brought into the inner circle. Well, the inner circle of wagons in Westminster is clearly there to make sure that the truth doesn't come out about what's happening with children.
But they need to continue to need fresh blood, which is why I believe the Save the Children Fund now, of course, jumping on the issue of Mosul. Iraq's children need you to act now. And what are they saying? Iraqi forces have just launched an assault on Mosul, the second biggest city in Iraq, which is currently occupied by Islamic State. This leaves 1.5 million people in Mosul, half of them children, with an impossible decision: stay and risk dying in the fighting, or flee through the deadly obstacle course of snipers and landmines. What can you do? Our government is backing Iraqi and Kurdish forces, which means they have an influential role in the offensive. This puts them in a strong position to push for the protection of buildings and so on. And they're asking for people to write to MPs and demand that these people are protected. Now, of course, there is a certain amount of hypocrisy amongst our MPs over this, because while we're busy criticising the Russians for what they're doing in eastern Aleppo, we are at the same time absolutely backing what's going on in Mosul. Save the Children calling for some action here. But of course, behind this campaign from Save the Children is the continuing pressure to take on unaccompanied children and child migrants into the UK. And we're just going to stick on this subject and say that if you're going to use the convenient form provided by Save the Children there, then perhaps you might like to invite MPs to answer the questions that still arise from children disappearing out of the UK care system that have been brought here on so-called humanitarian grounds. What has become of these children? Where are they? And what protections are in place for any future children that come in?
And of course, we have had no responses to any of the emails that UK Column has pushed out to the Metropolitan Police, for example, or the policing minister, saying, well, if you have a Met Police whistleblower, a man experienced in child protection, but also a man who was pointing out children were being trafficked, abused, murdered, and that was simply covered up by politicians, local authorities, charities, and the Met Police. No action. We've really got a criminal cabal, I think, running Parliament.
Absolutely. David, this issue of Mosul and child refugees in general, again, we're just forcibly, we're driving people.
That's exactly the case. This is just a continuation of this hybrid Grand Gladio model of no votes, no democratic votes in any of the Western sort of parties that are involved militarily. But what it does, the effect is it just displaces massive amounts of people and causes chaos for the people there. I mean, obviously, at the other end of the spectrum, at the defence industry end of the spectrum, there's a lot of expenditure and a lot of money being spent. You've got to ask, people have got to ask, other than opium, what else is being harvested? So, let's look at this objectively. Let's lift the veil and start seeing exactly what's going on here, because all these people, we've seen this now for 20, 30 years. We're going to end up with a huge amount of these people being displaced into other countries. These people that are in offices are not stupid. They know this is going to happen. So we've got to ask the questions: is this what they want to happen?
Yeah.
Absolutely, indeed. Okay, well, moving on then, Brexit or not. This is a think tank called the Political Studies Association, and they've produced this report, Brexit to Test UK's Constitution and Institutions to the Limit. The report itself is called the UK in a Changing Europe. So what are they talking about? They're saying that Brexit is going to put such huge pressures on Parliament, on the civil service, on the courts, and on the Constitution, Brian, that really it's an impossible situation. The whole lot is just going to blow up and explode. Apparently the civil service faces its biggest ever challenge. Negotiations with the EU will entail extensive coordination between new and existing ministries and an immense workload. They're concerned that the Great Repeal Bill, and I mean this is a justifiable concern, that the volume of work is going to be covered by the Great Repeal Bill in a certain respect, but there may be a temptation to use secondary legislation, statutory instruments, orders of council, and so on, which would raise concerns about transparency, legitimacy, and legislative quality, as they put it. And they're saying that the lack of clarity over Article 50 negotiations is another problem. So, but at the end of the day, it's all too complicated. But in another article that they've got posted today as well, they're asking, can Article 50 be revoked? And this perhaps gives us a clue to where they want to take us. They're saying, with much attention that is being garnered on the question of whether and how Article 50 notification takes place, there's another aspect that has less attention to date, namely that of whether, once invoked, it can be revoked. And they're suggesting three main ways that Article 50 could be revoked if at the end of the process it was decided to do so. One, by mutual consent, unilateral revocation by the other 27 EU members, and they're saying that that one isn't a likely one at all, that couldn't happen, and unilateral revocation by the UK. So at the end of the day, if we didn't like the deal that was on offer, we might choose to revoke Article 50 and stay in the EU. That, of course, would change the balance of power, and that perhaps we would end up being told what to do at that point, perhaps bringing us in even closer than otherwise.
Yeah, you can come back in because you're sort of begging to, or stay in. You can stay in because you begged us to stay in, and now we're going to absolutely tell you what to do at every level of running the country. Somebody in our chat box has just commented, so the civil service ran a third of the globe, coped with 2 world wars and the Cold War, but to come out of the European Union is the biggest challenge it's ever faced. Of course, what's being posted by the UK in a changing Europe has got to be complete and utter dross. And I note that King's College, of course, is proudly stamped on the top. So we are exactly where UK column forecasted all those months ago, that basically we had Nigel Farage waving his hands and saying, we've done it, we've achieved Brexit. We said this is absolute nonsense. What is going to happen is a smokescreen of delay and chaos, the so-called cul-de-sac, and that's exactly what we can see unfolding.
Yeah.
And what is happening the other side of the smokescreen, well, some very dangerous things are beginning to show their face in UK. So this is the Herald, a major article saying that there's been a big 2-week exercise between local police and the military preparing for violence in towns and cities. Part of it was rioters pelted police with petrol bombs and missiles as officers responded to a mass breakout of violence on the streets in a test of their response to urban disorder. So this would have cost, millions, hundreds of thousands of pounds, millions of pounds more likely. So somebody in central government is predicting that this country is heading towards mass violence on the streets. What is going to cause this? Well, we're not being told at the moment, but could it just be the government knows that if it carries on fiddling with Brexit, maybe this is deemed enough to cause violence on the street, but somewhere, somebody within the UK government is calmly predicting that this country is going to stoop to the level of violence on the streets. Could this be the objective? Utter chaos in UK, so there's no chance of us coming out of the EU. David, perhaps I could get a bit of comment from you, because this is a big step, I think, towards the making Britain's police a complete paramilitary organisation. Are they police? Are they military? We don't really know.
Exactly. So there's two things here. The officers in Whitehall are fully aware and preparing for this. So they know damn well that they have done something so bad and so slipshod that they're going to incur the wrath of the people. So this article is self-fulfilling. So it's almost as if they're sort of saying, well, we expect the people to do this, but it doesn't make any difference because whatever they do, because we're just going to carry on regardless. So, this is very, very alarming here, because what it shows clearly is it shows what they are thinking in Whitehall.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on your point about the merging of roles between military and civilian police, of course, we should remember the European Defence Agency conference, I believe it was last June or July, where Ms. Mogherini, the ostensible foreign minister of the European Union, was discussing this exact subject with Jens Stoltenberg of NATO. So they are working to merge military and civilian policing functions in some form.
And something that's very easy for us to see on that score, of course, is the fact that the uniform of our police has gone from being white shirts and a relatively soft uniform, albeit with a very strange British police hat. We've now gone to all black paramilitary uniform, black Union Jack flag. And while the private security companies have come in, Serco, G4S, of course, it's difficult to tell whether you're dealing with real police or you're dealing with a private company. But we got another clue of trouble. Let's bring in Andrew Parker of MI5. We mentioned this very, very briefly in the news yesterday, but he's had to come out of the woodwork in order to make a unique or give a unique interview with the press. MI5 head, increasingly aggressive Russia is a growing threat to UK. So let's think about it. UK is moribund at the moment. We don't know whether we're a nation state or whether we're simply a vassal state of the European Union. The government is worried about major violence on the streets. MI5 is having to speak out and say that Russia is a growing threat. But he's said some other things apart from those nasty Russians. He's claiming that 12 jihadi terror plots are foiled. Where's the evidence for that? I think the public should be able to see full reports on each of these incidents so that we have the proof that what this man says is true. I very much doubt whether this is true. I think this is part of publicity to help ramp up the fear factor. We've apparently got 3,000 British-born Islamic extremists in UK. Where is the evidence for that statement? If this man is speaking publicly about this sort of thing now, I believe he should be publicly challenged to produce the evidence to support this claim. And if we've got 3,000, surely this means that the government's prevent strategy has completely and utterly failed, and we've got yet more incompetence in Westminster. But here's the key. His empire is going to expand. 4,000 is going to increase to 5,000 officers. And we already know what many of these people are doing, are sitting spying on the British public, who the government is becoming increasingly frightened of as the public wakes up to the criminal activity in Westminster. He doesn't have any problem with investigatory powers, Bill, Mike, so we should relax there.
That's moving on through Parliament at the moment.
Moving on nicely. Trust Andrew Parker is that. And here we are. Brexit, he says confidently, will not affect work with the EU intelligence services. And I think here he's telling the truth, because there isn't going to be any change whatsoever in UK's relationship with the European Union. And then if you are pretty happy with your national identity, who you are, and who the bad guys are in government, we're going to have more women and ethnic minorities into MI5, and presumably MI5 is going to be able to screen all of the ethnic minorities, although we're saying at the moment not even the police know who people are because there's no record of them coming into the country. So we're not blaming the people who've come into the country. We're simply pointing out that the British government itself says we don't know how many people have come in, we don't know where they are. So create a false identity, join MI5. But not to worry, because the press is going to expose it all.
Possibly not. So press regulation, Leveson is back. The government is now seeking views on press regulation issues. It's wanting to make sure that the UK has a free and vibrant press, but one which is held fully accountable when things go wrong, apparently. So there you go. Following the events uncovered in 2011 when evidence emerged of phone hacking, blah, it goes on. So they want to seek views on the following two issues: the implementation of Section 40 of the Crime and Courts Act 2013. Now, this is the provision which has not been, it has been enacted, it has received royal assent, but it hasn't been signed off by the government yet. And what this does is allow any media organisation, press organisation, which hasn't signed up to the recognised regulator, they would then be liable for court costs for the other side if they received a libel writ, if they were accused of harassment and a few other things. They would court costs for the other side, even if they win their case. So that's a pretty unconstitutional situation. And also, the government looking for consultation on part 2 of the Leveson inquiry. Now, the Leveson inquiry was originally set up as 2 parts. Part 1 took place in 2012, as we know, and reported November 2013. That examined the culture, practices, and ethics of the press. Now they want to look at wrongdoing in the press and the police. So this is what Karen Bradley had to say. The government is determined that a balance is struck between press freedom and freedom of the individual. Those who are treated improperly must have redress. Likewise, politicians must not seek to muffle the press or prevent it doing legitimate work, such as holding us to account. And the police must take seriously its role in protecting not only its reputation, but also those people it's meant to serve. This is the balance we wish to strike, they claim. But of course, that's not quite how it's working out, as we've been discussing over a number of years now. So the question is whether they're going to actually sign off on Section 40 of the Crime and Justice Bill. They may sign off fully, or they may repeal it completely, or they may partially sign it off. And of course, Impress, one of the 2 regulators, has now been recognised by the Press Regulation Panel. Impress is the regulator that has the support of the Hacked Off campaign and the Media Standards Trust and Common Purpose. It's the, they claim to be independent, although all the language in the press release is all about self-regulation. Impress certainly would not be, could not be described as self-regulation by the press, since they don't, they're not supported by the press in any way. And in fact, they've got on their board, and do you think this is independent, Brian? On the board, they have at least one person who was one of the named victims of phone hacking. So how can they, when they've got that type of influence, that type of conflict of interest, how could they possibly be independent?
Yeah, well, they can't.
No. So here is Impress. Here's their website. The first truly independent press regulator in the UK. And that's what they describe themselves as. They've now been recognised as the independent regulator by the Press Recognition Panel. And of course, this was a prerequisite to having Section 40 of the Act sort of fully invoked.
This is unbelievably dangerous stuff going on here. Leveson was bad enough. That was at least exposed thanks to the efforts of the UK column, followed up principally by the Daily Mail that did 10 or 11 pages on it. The Telegraph followed, the Sun followed. Even the Guardian admitted that there was something wrong. Now, following that, they've let all the heat die down, and we're having another go at taking away proper press reporting freedoms.
Yes.
Plus the violence on the streets, plus MI5. Looks like a dictatorship forming.
But we're going to export it globally because it's hashtag Global Britain. That is the important thing. Now, here's Priti Patel. We like every opportunity to get her on screen. And she was, of course, highlighting the fact that Britain is going to be pushing soft power globally from now on. And the case that she was giving, it was with regard to trade relationships. Well, this is all part of Global Britain's new upcoming free trade deals. But we were interested that today they were pushing out the speech of Sarah Cook, who is the High Commissioner to Tanzania. And this is all part of the soft power complex which Britain is pushing out at the moment. She was hosting a joint reception for UK alumni in Tanzania and also Chevening scholars. Now, many people may not know what Chevening scholars are. We'll come on to that in a second. But UK alumni in Tanzania is a non-profit membership-based network. It's a network, Brian, aimed at promoting friendship and connections amongst the graduates of UK universities who are resident in Tanzania. So that sounds okay. It was formed in 2012 by a cross-section of UK degree holders in Tanzania, together with UK stakeholders in the country. Of course, the other thing was Chevening Scholars. Here's their website. Now, she was saying that the UK is known around the globe for its world-class universities, and so she was delighted to meet many of the people there who had benefited from a British education. And on the surface of it, what she's doing is selling British education abroad. But of course, we have to have a look at what Chevening scholarships are. So Chevening is the UK government's international award scheme aimed at developing global leaders. By enabling successful candidates to study for a master's degree in the UK, the scholarships offer a unique opportunity. They enable future leaders, influencers, and decision makers from all over the world to develop professionally and academically, network extensively, experience UK culture, and build lasting positive relationships in the UK.
So this is the UK burying its way into universities and where we'll say brighter candidates who might go on to help run their governments or run institutions in their countries. The UK is burying its way in there to reframe these people to support a UK-controlled world network.
So that's exactly right. So perhaps it shouldn't be no surprise then you don't have to dig too far on the Chevening website to end up with our old friends Common Purpose. Chevening scholarships creating, as you say, a global network of reframed common purpose future leaders. This is the extension of soft power, which aims to guarantee Britain's influence globally. This is hashtag Global Britain, isn't it? Well, another head of the soft power hydra, here we go. This is the NHS and the UK Rapid Response Team. This new rapid support team is going to respond to urgent requests from countries around the world to help control disease outbreaks within 48 hours, apparently. It consists of clinicians, scientists, and academics. And they're saying that the Ebola crisis highlighted the need for the international community to develop a system to help countries respond to and control disease outbreaks. Now, of course, where are they sending in? They're sending in epidemiologists, microbiologists, infection prevention and control people, but social scientists as well. Why do you need social scientists in this
Well, if
situation?
you're going to reframe them, you'll need to get the boys with the applied behavioural psychology in place, Mike.
Absolutely. So here's Nicola Blackwood, who's the Public Health Minister, and she said, Ebola shook the world and brave experts from the UK led the global response in Sierra Leone. The ability to deploy emergency support to investigate and respond to disease outbreaks within 48 hours will save lives, prevent further outbreaks, and cement the UK's position as a leader in global health security.
This is the same UK leading by Staffordshire Hospital and at least 10 or 11 other hospitals with the bodies coming out, and a report in the press today talking about a survey uncovering just horrific bullying through the NHS. So the bodies are coming out of British NHS, but we're going to export that capability worldwide.
Absolutely. David, have you any thoughts on British soft power?
It just is. It beggars belief, doesn't it? You look at the overall thread here. I mean, as Brian has just said, we've gone from, Keith Vaz to all the other facets in our society at the moment, and it almost begs the question: has Theresa May ordered all of her party's representatives that sit in Parliament, that I'm not deliberately not referring to them as MPs, I'm referring to them as party representatives, because under that command chain, which is amazingly effective, let nobody in the general public be under any illusion that these people first and foremost represent this thing called a party. Has she issued an instruction saying that under no circumstances are any of you to think or do anything useful whatsoever?
And we'll just pause slightly to let that sink in, but I think this is very true. You've suggested that we shouldn't really talk about members of Parliament. These people are simply representatives of their respective political parties, and we should call them Tory party representative Boris Johnson, etc. Well, what are we going to do? The first thing we can do is to bring people together. And I am going to say that ticket sales for the British Constitution Group event, Winchester, November the 19th, are going exceptionally well. Can we fill this hall? 400 plus places are available. And I the whole thrust of this is reasserting the rule of law in UK. Unless we can reassert law, we are going to fail in every other endeavour. The first step is to bring people together. So if you haven't yet got tickets, please get online, buy tickets. Of course, we're happy to see you at the door, but we need this hall full because, of course, it's people who attend who are going to be key drivers in reasserting the rule of law. And we've got some really fantastic speakers. Colin Canning here is the very brave banker who spoke out about what RBS has been doing with regard to people's accounts. And of course, he lost his job as a result of speaking out. And we've got our very own David Scott from Northern Exposure, who is going to be talking about what it means to be British, what this country should really be about. And in case anybody's feeling a little bit wobbly about the mention of Britain being a country for the British, of course, if we had our proper constitution and we had law giving proper law, proper judgment, we would be an ideal society to welcome in a great many other people. So we are really going to come back to basics. What is our British Constitution? What does it mean to be British? What's gone wrong? What can we do about it?
And of course, David Ellis will be speaking as well.
And of course, David Ellis, indeed, will also be there, Vanessa Beeley, and we are going to be working through the other speakers over the coming days. So we'll also put up an ad for this excellent film, The Great British Mortgage Swindle. This is going to be shown at the Savoy Cinema, Derby Road, Nottingham on the 5th of November. Very, very detailed information about how the banks have been committing fraud on a gross scale by means of created money and the mortgage and mortgages. And of course, mortgages ultimately being bundled up and sold off to make them even more money. And of course, creating the so-called toxic debt. Now, from the bankers, what better place to go than the military? And we've just got a section here which says to us that something very, very dangerous, something very wrong is going on inside Britain's military. We, the public, need to understand this and do something about it if we're to have a military which is indeed here to protect us, the public. Well, let's start off with this story. And David, I'll ask you for a bit of comment on it. The Mail here says that the Army's new 3.5 billion mini tanks are death traps, and they're only useful against incompetent enemies who cannot hit them with heavy artillery. Now, this is a pretty gross article because, of course, it isn't a mini tank. It's a lightly armoured reconnaissance vehicle. And the truth of the matter is the last thing tanks, main battle tanks, want to be in the middle of is an artillery bombardment. So this story is seems to be very carefully created to undermine the British military. We're calling reconnaissance vehicles mini tanks, which of course they're not. And the whole story is that these things are useless, but we're going to take 600 of them. At the same time, how many main battle tanks has Britain got? A few hundred. David, I've read this article several times. I don't know where the Mail is going on this, but it's like it's treacle. You can't really pick up what the point of the story is.
It looks like it's gearing for a false flag story or some kind of sprat to catch a mackerel or a self-fulfilling story. As a lot of the admirals that I talk to say this, frequently. They can see things that are self-fulfilling stories. This looks like, people are going to get killed in this, and then there's going to be a hoo-ha. That's the upshot, and they're going to be the best of our blood in them, and that's wrong. It's very, very wrong on so many levels. Where the tank thing is concerned, we used to have a perfectly functional operating company in Britain called Alvis that used to manufacture our tanks and Chieftains and Challengers and Challenger 2s, and we don't have that anymore. That's gone. So this is at the other end of the spectrum in terms of people's jobs, families, stability, life in Coventry and the area around here where it used to be. All that was destroyed in 2010 by David Cameron and Philip Hammond and co. So, we've really got to look at it from that perspective. And then, of course, at the sharp end there in the military, I don't think they have a couple of hundred. I think it's a lot less than that, Brian. But you'll have to check your numbers. But whatever the situation is, it isn't good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we're going to follow through on the subject of former General Sheriff, who we brought up yesterday. He'd been speaking, and it was incredible. He basically said Russia is the enemy. Let's have a look at that film clip again, and then we're just going to have a little look about what this man has been up to.
Effectively, therefore, by his actions, Putin has ripped up the post-Cold War settlement of Europe. And that was a settlement based as much as anything on working with Russia as a strategic partner. So any thoughts, I'm afraid, of Russia as a strategic partner are now gone. And in the words of a man that many of you will know and respect, as I do, Ambassador Sandy Vershbow, who's just stepped down as the Deputy Secretary General to NATO, Russia is now de facto a strategic adversary. And that threat continues to ratchet. Now, I wrote the book in 2015, between about, May and December was the real sort of burst of the major mother of all essay crises, as I call it. And actually, I would say that since then, that ratchet of the threat just goes on clicking up relentlessly.
So there we have it, this man who's saying Russia is the threat, and he's saying, oh, I wrote a book in a couple of months. Well, let's bring up what that book is about, because in fact, there had been a review of it. So it was 2017, War with Russia by General Sir Richard Sheriff. And what sort of things have we got in it? Well, it's his first novel, the best piece of superpower military fiction since Tom Clancy. The author, a recently retired British NATO 4-star general, shows in punchy drama documentary style the Western nations getting trapped into open warfare with Putin's Russia. So this is all fiction, it's all punchy, it's a bit Tom Clancy-ish. We've got more, though. The moral of the story is clear. The relentless hollowing out of the military and defence postures of the West have placed us all in danger. Cameron's casually dysfunctional defence policies have cut UK military strength by half since 2010, and Obama's posture of intellectualised disengagement has left Europe and the Mediterranean exposed. And then Robert Fox, the journalist who did this review, put this at the end. So run the hot bath, pour the fine malt, put Leonard Cohen on the player, and if necessary, have the razor blade in reserve. Enjoy this riot of a book and be very afraid. It could really happen. So this man has picked up pretty strongly that this book is about fear-mongering, but there's a very nasty little hint that you should read it and then commit suicide. David, with an eye on the time, just a brief comment, because I think you knew where that comment had come from.
Yeah, it looks like a cover from Marillion's Fugazi album, doesn't it? You know, laying in the bath as he slashes his wrists as there's the complete destruction of the world in the background. I mean, that's what it looked like to me when I first saw it. In regards to him stating that Putin has ripped up the agreements, no, I totally disagree with that, and there's a lot of others that disagree with it. And in terms of his book, he's actually stated it's an essay. You know, and an essay crisis, which is a Oxford-Cambridge reference to, you know, having to crib an essay very quickly. So he's written an essay. Who's he written the essay for? That's the question. In terms of coming to sort of Clancy with this, Maggie Thatcher, when she visited Ronald Reagan in the middle of the 80s, when we effectively turned the corner militarily and industrially, militarily after the Falklands, she asked Ronald what was the Cold War about, which is a very alarming question in the first instance, because she ought to, I nearly swore there, damn well know as a prime minister. She should have had that briefing. And Reagan told her to go and read Tom Clancy, and he'll tell her all about what the Cold War was about. So are we going to have the same with this? Is Theresa May going to wake up one morning and go, what was the Cold War about? And someone say, read Richard Sharif's book? You know, utter, total nonsense. You know, this needs properly looking at, properly challenging and scrutinising.
Yeah, there's something very strange going here. If we come back to this gentleman, of course, he made very big of the fact that he spoke out about the cuts. He accused the government of hollowing out the Royal Navy. Defence cuts meant the Royal Navy was being cut to the bone. It was a hell of a gamble. David Cameron made UK a semi-pacifist nation. I question whether UK could deploy a division for war. So this was all said around the time his book came out, but he was deeply embroiled in the military at the very time these cuts were taking place. He didn't resign. So the paper cynically suggested, or maybe not so cynically, that this was all very good for helping to promote his book. Well, we took a little look at what he was involved in. We found this very interesting organisation, the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, and I'd encourage people to go and have a look at it and have a look at some of these individuals. We can't show them all on screen because we haven't got time, but we have a look at the chairman, Francois Heisberg. Here he is. If we look back through, he's been working with the French Ministry of Defence. He's been working with big defence companies, Thomson CSF, Matra Defence. So this man is clearly part of the defence machinery. He's part of big money through commercial defence companies, but now he's very big on strategic studies, and they're promoting Mr. Sharif. And this man caught my eye and encouraged people to have a look at his little CV, because he's a philosopher, he's a neuroscientist, and he's a geostrategist. And these people, if they're to be believed, are meeting with our best interests at heart to make sure we live in a loving world. But Mike, on the subject of your networks, if you have a look at this man's CV, he's actually talking about collective civilizational triumph. The word collectivism is in there. It's about bringing people together. And this man is very big on how your brain works. I don't get a particularly comfortable feeling. Well, if that's not enough, we understand that Sir Richard Sharif has started a company, Strategia Worldwide, and this is a risk management company. Please have a look. We're fascinated to see who he's teamed up with. We've got Lord Peter Hain. We've got Sir Hugh Ward, former head of the Met Police. But he's now an experienced operator in crisis management. Okay, and many people of interest, but we happened to spot this young lady, Danica Cappy. She's done everything. She's worked with NATO. She's into strategic planning, management, disaster management. And we just spotted down at the bottom, she's also been working on the transformation of the Albanian armed forces. And that rang a bell because, of course, on the 29th of September, the government was bigging up the fact that Michael Fallon had been out with British armed forces in Albania, because apparently Albania is now one of our strongest allies. Albania is a key partner in Southern Europe, an ally which is meeting its security challenges, and on it goes. So I think the question is, how do you just jump out of the British military into these extremely powerful, what is it, a think tank? That's on one hand. And on the other hand, you've got a business where you've got politicians, you've got bankers, Lloyds of London, risk analysis, NATO people. This is like a sort of shadow government almost contained within a private company. It's fascinating. David, sorry.
Yeah, there's some very, very important questions here that we need to put. And, you know, politics is all about how can I get away with not being questioned? And this is one of the key things here that I'm seeing. So there's the key stuff here. How many men and key bits of assetry did Richard Sharif save from the chop during these infernal cuts that we've endured? And we keep seeing this, and saying that Putin's ripped up the dynamic in the agreement. No, absolutely, that's not the case. But more importantly, we're seeing this group, if you want to call them that, or I mean, they're almost, as you're saying, Brian. You could argue that they've in essence got the makeup there of a shadow government. There's certainly enough big hitters and key players. They're talking up war with Russia. And that fundamentally cannot work. It just cannot work, will not work. The only thing that can be an outcome from going down that avenue, politically or financially, is the formation of EU military, because there's no way there is just no way that anything else can come of it. None of the states in Europe are anywhere near capable on their own to even think about doing anything. So the only way it can be done is in a group. So you've got to say, is that, and that's the question, is that their agenda?
Okay, well, whilst we've got all of these strange events around the military, we've mentioned Michael Fallon. The one thing the British government doesn't want to go near is the plight of Sergeant Alexander Blackman. So this Royal Marine Sergeant's still in prison. He's been in 3 years. But how remarkable that after the UK column reports it, the local Plymouth Herald newspaper has pointed out that 5,000 people have now signed a petition calling for the release of this Royal Marine. We are very pleased to see that. But we're also going to ask where local Conservative MP Johnny Mercer is, because he's former military himself. We emailed him to ask what he was actually doing to support Alexander Blackman. And of course, to date, we've had total silence. So we'll watch with interest on that.
That's us.
That's us. David, thank you very much for joining us. Very dangerous times in UK, government out of control, people with a very checkered background brought onto justice committees. And of course, we've got our very own anti-corruption MP now, Mr. Pickles. I feel reassured, not. And of course, Russia now being blatantly attacked by UK and the US to be made the world bogeyman. Dangerous times. We'll be back tomorrow reporting more of the reality of what's happening in UK. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.